Racist employees humiliate a black rookie by making him clean up after them, unaware that he is their new boss. How far will they go before they learn the truth? Will payback await them? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Write in the comments. Where are you watching this video from? The day Alexei walked into his newly acquired company, he wasn't the wealthy entrepreneur that had built a business empire from scratch. Today, he was dressed simply, in jeans, a worn jacket, and an old pair of shoes. He knew very well that his appearance didn't match the typical image of a company owner, but that was precisely the point. Alexei's goal was to observe this place anonymously, getting an unfiltered view of the people who now worked for him. The company he had just purchased was an IT firm that had, over the years, gained a certain reputation, but Alexei's initial walkthrough of the building left him with a sour feeling. The lobby looked grand with its high ceilings and expensive lighting, but there was dust on the edges of furniture and corners. A tired receptionist, barely looking up from her phone, had waved him in without a single greeting. He could sense something unsettling beneath the polished surface of the business. This company had lost its sense of direction and purpose, and he was here to change that. As he walked down the corridor, employees spared him only passing glances, most of them uninterested in his presence. Dressed the way he was, he likely looked like a maintenance worker or a new temp, and that suited him just fine. He hadn't expected to be recognized, especially after making it clear to HR to keep his identity a secret for his first day. He wanted a raw experience, to see the genuine nature of his employees when they didn't know they were being watched by their new boss. Alexei noted the overall atmosphere as he walked past. Here and there, clusters of workers chatted and laughed, some discussing weekend plans, others sharing complaints about management or the slow coffee machines. It was an atmosphere he knew well from his early years, an environment that was comfortable but bordering on complacent. It was one thing to relax with coworkers, but Alexei knew the signs of a workplace that lacked accountability. As he wandered, his path was abruptly blocked by a tall, smug-looking man who wore a badge indicating he was a team leader. The man's expression held nothing but disdain as he looked Alexei up and down. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone barely hiding his contempt. "Just looking around," Alexei replied calmly. "Looking around?" The man scoffed, as if the idea of Alexei being here was laughable. "This isn't a place for wandering around. If you're here for cleaning, head straight to the back. I think the restrooms need attention." The comment was meant as a joke, but it was wrapped in a sneer that was hard to ignore. The man exchanged smirks with a few others who had overheard the exchange. A woman nearby giggled, giving Alexei a once-over before muttering something under her breath that he couldn't quite catch. Alexei felt the sting of their mockery, but he simply nodded, his face expressionless. The team leader rolled his eyes. "Just go down the hall and take the last door on the right. They'll tell you what to do from there. We don't have time for someone lost wandering around here." As Alexei turned to head down the hall, he heard the faint murmurs and snickers following him. He didn't need to look back to know that they were laughing at him. His jaw clenched, but he continued forward, reminding himself why he was doing this. This was a test of their culture, their values, and their respect for others. He passed a few more offices on his way down the hall, glancing at the closed doors and the faint glow of computer monitors inside. A memory came to him, a flashback of his own early days in the industry, when he had been on the bottom rung of the ladder, working for people who barely acknowledged his existence. He'd experienced enough dismissiveness and condescension to know how it could affect one's morale. And here he was again, willingly placing himself in a position to relive those humiliations, to see if this company was worth his time and energy to reform. Reaching the end of the hall, Alexei found himself at the last door on the right. Pushing it open, he was greeted by the sight of a large, dingy storage room that seemed to double as a janitorial closet. Shelves stacked with cleaning supplies lined the walls, and the air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and old dust. A mop bucket sat in one corner, water sloshing around in it from recent use, and nearby lay a pile of worn-out rags, discarded carelessly on the floor. "Hey, you're here to work?" another voice called out from behind him. Turning, Alexei found himself face to face with a middle-aged man in overalls, one of the few actual maintenance workers in the building. "Yes," Alexei replied, keeping his expression neutral. The worker handed him a pair of rubber gloves, smirking slightly. "If you're new, you're going to need these," he said, gesturing to the pile of dirty rags and mops. "And I hope you're not squeamish, 'cause it's been a while since anyone really cleaned up in there." Alexei accepted the gloves without a word, slipping them on as he surveyed the pile of cleaning supplies. He could already hear faint laughter from the hall, where a small group of employees had gathered to watch him. They weren't even trying to be subtle about it. One of them, a young woman with an expensive-looking handbag slung over her shoulder, pointed at him and whispered something to her companion, who laughed loudly. As he picked up a mop, he heard the woman call out, "Make sure you scrub extra hard. The last guy didn't do a great job." Her voice dripped with condescension, and her friend snickered, adding, "Yeah, and we expect spotless results." Alexei gritted his teeth, but he maintained a calm demeanor. He'd come here to see how these people treated those they considered beneath them, and now he was getting his answer. The worst part wasn't even the task itself. He'd done hard, thankless work in his early years, and cleaning didn't intimidate him. What stung was the blatant disrespect, the assumption that he was less than them simply because he wasn't dressed in a suit. He pushed open the door to the restroom and was immediately hit by a wave of foul odors. The toilets were unflushed, the sinks covered in grime, and the mirrors were streaked with smudges and handprints. It was a mess no one had bothered to deal with, apparently. Bending over to start scrubbing, Alexei felt the humiliation rise like bile in his throat. His mind wandered to the lofty goals he had for this place, the plans he'd drawn up for revitalizing this company and turning it into a beacon of respect and equality. He had wanted to build a culture of integrity, to lead a team that shared his values. And now, here he was, on his knees with a mop, cleaning up after people who thought so little of him. As he worked, his thoughts shifted back to the tall, arrogant team leader who had directed him here. He recalled the disdainful look in the man's eyes, the way he had sized Alexei up and dismissed him without a second thought. This man, and the others like him in this company, were the reason why Alexei had chosen to keep his identity a secret for this initial visit. He wanted to see the true nature of these people, to understand who they really were when they thought they were above reproach. And he was learning more than he'd ever expected. When he finally finished, he stood back, looking at his handiwork. The bathroom was spotless. He had gone above and beyond, cleaning every inch, ensuring that the room was as pristine as it had ever been. It wasn't about pride. It was about proving to himself that he wouldn't let their treatment diminish his own standards. Stepping out into the hallway, Alexei noticed the cluster of employees watching him again, their expressions smug and satisfied. The team leader gave him a mocking nod. "Good work, janitor," he sneered. "Maybe we'll keep you around if you keep doing such a thorough job." Alexei met the man's gaze, his own expression unreadable. He didn't respond, simply holding his head high as he made his way back down the corridor, ignoring the laughter and whispers that followed him. He knew that tomorrow, everything would be different. Tomorrow, they would learn the truth about who he was, and the memory of their sneers and scorn would come back to haunt them. The stage was set. The next morning, Alexei returned to the building. This time, he wore the same clothes as the day before, maintaining his simple, unassuming look. He didn't want to reveal his identity just yet. There was still more to observe, more layers of this company's culture to peel back. And as he walked down the hall, his suspicions from the day before were quickly confirmed. The team leader from the previous day, whose name he'd since learned was Sergei, spotted him almost immediately. Sergei's sneer was back in full force as he sauntered over, followed closely by a small entourage of equally smug co-workers. They made no effort to hide their disdain, openly whispering and smirking as they approached. "Back again, I see," Sergei remarked, crossing his arms as he looked Alexei up and down. "Guess they didn't throw you out after yesterday's stellar performance." His sarcasm was thick, his tone dripping with condescension. "I was asked to come back today," Alexei replied calmly, his expression neutral. Sergei exchanged glances with his co-workers, and they all chuckled. "Well, since you're here, we could use a hand. There's a bit of a mess that needs dealing with. You seem to be pretty good at that sort of thing." Before Alexei could respond, Sergei gestured toward a stack of trash bags piled near the exit. They were overstuffed and leaking, clearly left out in the open as an intentional test. A sour smell wafted through the air, and Alexei could see stains forming on the floor around the bags. The employees had purposefully neglected the trash, leaving it to fester, as if daring him to clean it up. "You don't mind, do you?" Sergei asked, raising an eyebrow as he motioned to the bags. "Just thought we'd put your talents to good use." Behind Sergei, his co-workers were barely containing their laughter, exchanging whispers that Alexei caught fragments of. This guy actually came back. Hope he brought his rubber gloves. Maybe we should teach him the real meaning of hard work. It was clear that they didn't see him as a person, but rather as an object of their amusement. They saw him as someone they could toy with, someone they could humiliate without consequence. And as Alexei stood there, feeling the weight of their disdain, he couldn't help but wonder how many other people they had treated this way. Without a word, he put on his gloves and began picking up the bags one by one, ignoring the murmurs and laughter around him. The bags were heavier than they looked, some of them soaked through with unidentified liquids that seeped through the thin plastic. The smell was unbearable, but Alexei focused on his task, refusing to let his discomfort show. He'd worked hard jobs in the past, jobs that required more strength and resilience than these people could ever imagine. But there was something uniquely degrading about this situation. It wasn't the task itself, it was the way they treated him while he did it. As he bent down to pick up another bag, one of the women in the group, a young woman with a perfectly manicured appearance, stepped forward and pretended to stumble. She accidentally bumped into him, causing him to drop the bag he was holding. The contents spilled out across the floor and she gasped dramatically, covering her mouth as if horrified by her own actions. "Oh no," she exclaimed, her voice thick with feigned sympathy. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see you there. Here, let me help you clean that up." Her tone made it clear that she had no intention of actually helping. Instead, she stepped back and watched as Alexei bent down to gather the scattered trash, her smirk never leaving her face. The others joined in, laughing openly now, some of them clapping mockingly as if he were performing for their entertainment. One of them muttered, "Look at him go. What a dedicated worker." The sarcasm in his voice was sharp, each word carefully chosen to deepen the humiliation. Through it all, Alexei remained silent, methodically picking up each piece of garbage and placing it back in the bag. But inside, he was seething. The lack of respect, the casual cruelty, the arrogance. These were people who had grown too comfortable, too entitled in their positions. They thought themselves untouchable, and they saw no harm in belittling those they considered beneath them. Little did they know, the man they were laughing at held their careers in his hands. Once he had gathered up all the trash, he carried the bags to the back exit, where the dumpsters were located. As he approached the dumpsters, he could still hear faint laughter echoing from the building. The humiliation lingered, a bitter taste that he couldn't shake. But he knew that enduring this was necessary. He needed to see the full extent of their contempt, to understand just how deep this rot ran. Back inside, Sergei was waiting for him, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Good job," he sneered, clapping his hands slowly in mock applause. "You're really taking this cleaning thing seriously, huh? Maybe we should get you your own broom and mop. After all, every company needs someone to take care of the dirty work." Another employee, a man with a slightly nervous air about him, glanced at Sergei before adding, "Hey, Sergei, maybe we should send him to clean the toilets again. You know, just to make sure he's got all the experience he needs." His attempt at joining in on the joke was clumsy, and it was clear he was trying to impress Sergei, who only smirked in response. The suggestion hung in the air, and Alexei knew they weren't joking. Sergei nodded, gesturing towards the restroom. "Yeah, that's a good idea. Go on, do your thing. And make sure it's spotless this time." Alexei's stomach tightened with anger, but he remained composed, nodding slightly as he headed toward the restroom. He could feel their eyes on him, their sneers and mocking glances piercing his back. The humiliation was raw, palpable, but he reminded himself that this was temporary. Soon enough, they would realize their mistake. The restroom was just as filthy as it had been the previous day, if not worse. It seemed that his cleaning efforts from yesterday had been intentionally sabotaged. Someone had left muddy footprints across the freshly mopped floor, and one of the sinks was filled with crumpled paper towels. The mirror, which he had painstakingly polished, was now smeared with fingerprints and grime. It was a calculated act of disrespect, a message that they didn't care about his work, that they saw him as nothing more than a disposable tool for their amusement. As he began cleaning again, he could hear faint voices outside the door. Sergei and his friends were lingering nearby, whispering and laughing. They were watching him, waiting to see how he would react, hoping for a moment of frustration or anger that they could seize upon and mock. But Alexei gave them nothing. He worked steadily, methodically, ignoring the laughter and the taunts that drifted in from the hallway. When he finally finished, he stood back, taking a deep breath as he looked at the spotless restroom. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. He had maintained his composure, refusing to let their cruelty shake him. And he knew that his patience would soon pay off. As he stepped out of the restroom, Sergei was waiting for him, a satisfied smirk on his face. "All done?" he asked, his tone mocking. "Good job, champ. You're really showing everyone how it's done." Alexa nodded, meeting Sergei's gaze with a calm expression. "Just doing my job," he replied evenly, refusing to give Sergei the reaction he wanted. Sergei scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Yeah, well, keep it up. Maybe if you're lucky, they'll promote you to, I don't know, chief janitor or something. You know, someone who's really in charge of keeping things spotless." The others laughed, nodding in agreement as they continued to watch Alexei with amusement. He could see the satisfaction in their eyes, the smugness of people who believe themselves superior. They had no idea who he was, no idea of the power he held over them, but that would soon change. As he left the building that evening, Alexei felt a quiet resolve settling over him. The humiliation he had endured, the mockery and disdain, had only strengthened his determination. He had seen their true colors, seen the rot at the core of this company's culture. And he was ready to clean house, not as a janitor, but as their new boss. Tomorrow, he would reveal his true identity, and he would make it clear that their behavior had consequences. They had shown him no respect, no decency, and now they would face the consequences of their actions. As he walked away from the building, Alexei's mind was already racing with plans. He would start by holding a meeting, calling everyone together to announce his position and intentions. And then he would begin the process of weeding out those who had shown themselves unworthy of the company he planned to rebuild. The following morning, Alexei dressed with more purpose than he ever had in recent memory. This time, he wasn't donning worn jeans and an old jacket. Today, he wore a tailored suit, one that spoke of confidence and authority. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, his mind replayed the events of the last 2 days. The indignities he had endured, the cruel laughter and whispered taunts, the snide remarks, they were all fresh in his mind, fueling the quiet determination that now settled over him. It was time to reveal the truth. As he drove to the office, his thoughts shifted from the mocking faces of his employees to his own beginnings. Years ago, he had been just another young man starting at the bottom, working long hours and enduring his own share of scorn from those who believed themselves superior. He had fought through all of it, building his way up, proving himself again and again. And now, with all he had achieved, he would not let the arrogance and cruelty he had witnessed go unchecked. When he arrived at the office building, he could feel the weight of what was about to happen pressing on him. As he walked through the lobby, employees threw him brief glances, some of them confused, others startled by the transformation. They clearly recognized him, but now he wore a suit, and there was an unmistakable shift in his presence, a quiet authority that radiated from him as he made his way to the main conference room. Inside, Sergei and his usual entourage were gathered, chatting among themselves, completely unaware of what was coming. They barely looked up when he entered, though a few of them did a double-take upon seeing him in formal attire. But Sergei just chuckled, nudging one of his friends and making a comment Alexa could only imagine. Their expressions were smug, confident, and entirely oblivious. Once he was in the room, Alexa took a seat at the head of the table, ignoring the murmurs and whispers around him. He took a deep breath, settling his thoughts and waiting for the rest of the team to gather. Today's meeting was mandatory, as he had instructed HR to make clear in the invitation. It would be the first meeting where he addressed them all as their new leader, and it would be a moment none of them would soon forget. As the room filled up, people gradually fell silent, their curious eyes darting towards him. Sergei and his friends were still lounging in their seats, trading smirks and quietly joking, seemingly entertained by the janitor's attempt at dressing up. But Alexei was calm, steady. He waited until the last person had taken their seat, watching as each face turned to him in expectation, some of them already wary of what he might say. Finally, he stood up, clearing his throat. The room fell into complete silence, all eyes fixed on him. He took a moment to let the quiet stretch, to let the weight of the moment sink in. Then he spoke, his voice firm and steady, carrying an authority that left no room for doubt. "My name is Alexei Ivanov," he began, watching the flickers of confusion and surprise ripple across the room. "I am the new owner of this company." A murmur ran through the crowd, a mix of shock and disbelief. Sergei's smug expression faltered, his eyes widening as he realized what was happening. His friends exchanged anxious glances, their faces paling as the reality of the situation set in. Alexei let the silence settle once more, observing the reactions around him. The air was thick with tension, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavily between them. "You may not have known who I was these past few days," he continued, his gaze sweeping over the room, lingering on the faces of those who had treated him with the most disdain. "But I assure you, I knew exactly who each of you were. I came here as an observer to see the true culture of this company, to understand the people who work here when they believe they're not being watched." His words were calm, measured, but the effect was devastating. Faces dropped, eyes widened, and silence filled the room as each person began to understand the gravity of the situation. The laughter, the taunts, the smugness, they all came rushing back, each cruel word and smirk replaying in their minds with excruciating clarity. Alexei turned his attention to Sergei, who was now staring at the table, his usual confidence gone, replaced by a growing dread. "Some of you," Alexei said, his gaze fixed on Sergei, "seem to believe that this company exists for your amusement, that the people who work here are here to serve you, to be treated however you please, that anyone you consider beneath you deserves your scorn." The room was dead silent, the weight of his words pressing down on each person. No one dared to speak. No one dared to even breathe too loudly. Sergei shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger, but he said nothing. His friends, the ones who had laughed and sneered alongside him, were equally subdued, their faces drawn and pale. Alexei let his gaze travel over the room, making eye contact with each person, watching as they squirmed under his scrutiny. What I saw these past 2 days was a company lacking in respect, lacking in decency. I watched as some of you laughed at a man you thought was below you, treating him like nothing more than dirt. I watched as you made him clean toilets, take out your trash, and endure insults, all because you assumed he had no power, no value, and you found it amusing. The silence was thick, oppressive. A few people glanced around, their faces filled with shame and regret. The ones who had stayed silent, who hadn't joined in the taunts but had watched without objection, now looked down, avoiding his gaze. They knew they were complicit, that their silence had allowed the cruelty to continue unchecked. "And so," Alexei continued, his voice cutting through the silence, "I want to make one thing very clear. This behavior will no longer be tolerated in my company. From this moment on, every single person in this building will be held to a standard of respect and integrity. Those who cannot uphold that standard will no longer be welcome here." A ripple of unease ran through the room, and Alexei could see the fear in their eyes, the realization that there would be consequences for their actions. Sergei finally looked up, his face twisted with a mix of anger and desperation. "Mr. Ivanov, if I may," he began, his voice shaky, but Alexei cut him off with a sharp look. "I don't believe you have anything to say that would excuse your behavior," Alexei replied coldly. I saw how you treated me, Sergey. I saw the way you laughed, the way you sneered, the way you thought yourself superior. And I want you to know that I will not forget it." Sergey's mouth snapped shut, his face turning red as he looked down, thoroughly chastened. Alexei turned to the others, watching as they fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable, clearly regretting their actions. To everyone who stood by and said nothing, he continued, his gaze shifting to the silent bystanders, "I am disappointed. You may not have joined in the mockery, but your silence allowed it to continue. Inaction in the face of cruelty is a form of complicity, and it has no place here." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, allowing them to feel the weight of their choices. He knew that some of them had simply gone along with the crowd, that they hadn't intended to be cruel, but he also knew that silence could be just as damaging as active cruelty, and he would not allow it to go unaddressed. "There will be changes," Alexei announced, his voice calm but firm. "Starting today, this company will undergo a complete cultural shift. I will be implementing new policies, new standards, and there will be a thorough review of each person's conduct. Those who have shown a pattern of disrespect, those who have demonstrated a lack of integrity, will be subject to disciplinary action." A murmur of apprehension filled the room as people began to realize the seriousness of his intentions. Alexei watched their reactions carefully, noting the fear, the anxiety, and the regret. He knew that some of them would resist the changes, that they would try to hold on to the old ways. But he was ready for that. He was prepared to do whatever it took to transform this company into the kind of place he could be proud of. "There will be no exceptions," he continued, his gaze hardening. "From the highest-ranking manager to the newest hire, everyone will be held to the same standard. This company will become a place of respect, a place of integrity, or it will cease to exist as it is." The room was silent, each person absorbing the full impact of his words. Alexei could see the fear in their eyes, the dawning realization that their behavior had consequences, that they were no longer safe behind the masks of their positions. Sergei looked down, his face pale, his hands clenched into fists as he realized the depth of his mistake. Alexei took a final look around the room, his expression firm. "I expect each of you to consider your actions carefully. Think about the kind of person you want to be, the kind of company you want to work for, because from this moment forward, I will tolerate nothing less than excellence." With that, he turned and left the room, leaving them in stunned silence. As he walked away, he could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the heavy weight of their guilt and fear settling over them. They knew now that their actions had repercussions, that they were no longer immune to accountability, and for the first time Alexei felt a sense of satisfaction, a sense of justice. He had seen their true faces, and he had shown them his own. Now it was up to them to decide how they would move forward. But one thing was certain. They would never again forget the lesson they had learned today. The morning after Alexei's revelation, the office was eerily quiet. A tense, almost suffocating silence hung over every cubicle, every corner. Whispers were rare, and laughter was entirely absent. The usual casual chatter had vanished, replaced by nervous glances and downcast faces. Everyone knew that today was the beginning of something they couldn't escape, a reckoning. True to his word, Alexei had launched an immediate review of each employee's performance and conduct. He wasn't just looking for efficiency or productivity. He was searching for integrity, accountability, and respect. The evaluation was thorough and merciless, an assessment not only of work performance, but of character. This wasn't merely an HR formality. It was a reevaluation of the very foundation on which the company stood. The staff, aware of the ongoing review, moved with an anxious alertness, aware that every action, every word was now subject to scrutiny. Alexei had made it clear that this was no temporary shift for those who had mocked and belittled him when they thought he was powerless. It was a terrifying prospect. They had taken his tolerance for granted, seeing it as weakness. Now they understood how wrong they had been. In the days that followed, Alexei called each employee into his office individually. The process was meticulous. He spent time with each person, asking pointed questions, examining their attitudes and intentions. His tone was calm but firm, his demeanor unwavering as he listened to each explanation, each attempt at justification. For some, the conversations were brief and pointed, their remorse evident and sincere. Those who had witnessed the mockery but hadn't participated actively came with heads bowed, their apologies genuine. Alexei noted their humility, recognizing that they, too, had been swept up in a toxic culture they hadn't known how to resist. These individuals, while not entirely faultless, were offered the opportunity to change. But for others, those who had been the loudest voices, the instigators of cruelty, there was no leniency. Sergei, in particular, had been the first called into Alexei's office. The man's once smug demeanor was gone, replaced by a desperate, almost frantic need to explain himself. As he took a seat across from Alexei, the tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken regret and shame. "Mr. Ivanov, I just want to apologize," Sergei stammered, his face pale. I didn't know. I mean, if I had known who you were." Alexei's gaze was unyielding. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Sergei's, allowing the weight of his silence to press down on him before he finally spoke. "You didn't know who I was," Alexei said calmly, "and that was the whole point. I came here to see how you treat people you consider unimportant, and you showed me exactly who you are." Sergei shifted uncomfortably, his hands twisting together as he struggled to find the right words. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean any harm. It was just joking around, you know?" "Joking around?" Alexei's voice was icy, his words sharp as they cut through Sergei's feeble attempts at justification. "Do you think it's appropriate to humiliate someone, to demean them for your own amusement? Do you consider that harmless?" Sergei looked away, unable to meet Alexei's gaze. The silence stretched between them, heavy and unforgiving. "What you did," Alexei continued, his voice calm but unyielding, "wasn't just a joke. It was cruelty, and it's exactly the kind of behavior I refuse to tolerate in this company." Sergei swallowed, his face ashen. "Please, Mr. Ivanov, I need this job. I've been here for years. And in all those years, did it never occur to you to treat people with respect?" Alexei interrupted, his tone cutting through Sergei's excuses. "Did it never cross your mind that your actions have consequences?" Sergei's shoulders slumped, his bravado completely shattered. There was nothing left of the arrogant, mocking man from just a few days ago. Now he was simply a man facing the consequences of his actions, stripped of his illusions of superiority. Alexei let the silence linger, watching as Sergei squirmed under his gaze. Finally, he spoke. "I'm letting you go, Sergei," he said, his tone final, effective immediately. "Your behavior is incompatible with the culture I'm building here, and I have no place for someone who treats others with such disdain." Sergei's face went pale, his eyes widening as he processed the words. "Please, Mr. Ivanov," he whispered, his voice desperate. I can change. I'll do anything, I promise." But Alexei's decision was unwavering. He stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "You had your chance, Sergei. This is the result of the choices you made. You can collect your belongings and leave by the end of the day." Sergei stood slowly, his face a mixture of shock and despair. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but Alexei's stern expression silenced him. With a final, defeated nod, Sergei left the office, his footsteps heavy as he walked away, the reality of his situation settling over him. One by one, Alexei dealt with each person who had shown a lack of respect, each one who had contributed to the toxic atmosphere he was determined to eradicate. Some pleaded, others apologized profusely, but Alexei remained resolute. There was no place in his company for cruelty or arrogance. He would rather rebuild his team from the ground up than allow that kind of behavior to continue unchecked. By the end of the week, the company had undergone a transformation. Several people had been let go, and those who remained were acutely aware of the new standards. The atmosphere was tense, but it was also different, more respectful, more thoughtful. People greeted each other with a new sense of decency, aware that their actions mattered, that they were a part of something bigger than themselves. But Alexei's changes didn't stop with the firings. He implemented a series of workshops and training sessions focusing on empathy, respect, and integrity. Every employee, from the entry-level staff to the department heads, was required to attend. The sessions were thorough, covering not only professional conduct but also the importance of kindness and understanding in the workplace. Some of the employees grumbled at first, reluctant to engage in discussions about empathy and respect. But Alexei was firm. He attended every session himself, setting the example, showing them that this was not just a formality, but a fundamental part of the company's new culture. Over time, the resistance faded, replaced by a genuine understanding of the importance of these values. As the weeks went by, the changes took root. Alexei noticed subtle shifts in behavior. People holding doors open for each other, offering help without being asked, listening attentively in meetings. The toxic arrogance that had once permeated the office was gone, replaced by a culture of support and mutual respect. One afternoon, as Alexei walked through the office, he saw a small group gathered around a new intern, a young man who looked slightly overwhelmed. Instead of mocking him or ignoring him, as they might have done in the past, the employees were helping him, guiding him through his tasks with patience and encouragement. It was a small moment, but to Alexei, it symbolized everything he had worked for. He felt a sense of pride, a quiet satisfaction that went beyond profit or success. This was more than just a business to him. It was a place where people could work without fear of humiliation, where they could grow and thrive in an environment of respect. As he returned to his office, he found a letter on his desk. It was from one of the employees who had initially been skeptical of his changes. The letter was simple but heartfelt, thanking him for creating a workplace where people were valued for who they were, not just for their titles or appearances. The employee admitted that they had once been part of the problem, but now they were proud to be part of the solution. Alexei smiled as he read the letter, feeling a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. He had come here to change the culture, to build something meaningful, and he had succeeded. The employees were no longer afraid of him, nor were they fearful of each other. They respected him, and more importantly, they respected each other. In the end, Alexei's decision to endure the initial humiliation had been worth it. He had seen their true faces, had witnessed the worst of their behavior, but he had also seen their potential for growth, their capacity for change. And now he was leading a team that shared his values, a team that understood the importance of respect and integrity. As he looked out over the office, watching his employees work together with a newfound sense of camaraderie, Alexei felt a quiet pride. The journey had been difficult, the lessons harsh, but the transformation was undeniable. This was no longer just a company. It was a community, a place where people could be themselves, without fear, without judgment. And Alexei knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a team built on a foundation of trust, respect, and kindness. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new videos. We have more exciting stories in store. Click on the bell to be notified and skip to the next videos. There's lots more to come.